There are two education systems in this country. One runs on bells, grades, standardized tests, and a curriculum that hasn't fundamentally changed in over 100 years. The other one has no grades, no standardized tests, small classes, kids who learn by building things, arguing about ideas and chasing their own curiosity. The first one is for you. The second one is for the people who run the first one. The richest, most powerful families on earth have quietly opted their own children out of the exact system they fund, defend, and require everyone else to use. Today I'm going to walk with you through the facts, where the system actually came from, what it was actually built to do, and what the people at the very top choose instead, with their own kids, with their own money. Let's get into it. You've heard the story, the TED Talk, the documentary, and if not, it goes like this. Modern school was invented in Prussia to manufacture obedient factory workers. Sit in rows, respond to bells, don't think, comply. An American named Horace Mann admired it, brought the model home, and the great fortunes of the early 20th century, Rockefeller, Carnegie, Ford, funded it to keep the working class dumb and manageable. Prussia made schooling compulsory in 1763. Under Frederick the Great, a royal decree, 8 years of school for every child. Now hold that date, 1763. Here's the problem. Prussia in 1763 wasn't an industrial society. It was a feudal one. East of the Elbe River, the economy ran on something called Gutsherrschaft, great estates owned by a noble class called the Junkers, worked by peasants who were legally bound to the land. That's serfdom. Prussia didn't even begin abolishing serfdom until 1807. There were no factories, no assembly lines, no industrial working class. The coal and steel boom, the thing that actually made Germany an industrial power, didn't take off until the 1840s and 1850s. So think about the timeline. The school system comes first, the factories come almost a century later. You could not design a school to produce factory workers for factories that will not exist for 3 more generations. It's like claiming the people who invented the horse-drawn carriage were secretly designing it for the highway system. The highway didn't exist yet. So if it wasn't built for the factory, what was it built for? The answer is more honest and frankly more chilling than workers. It was built for the state. In 1806, Napoleon marched into Prussia and humiliated its army at the Battle of Jena, a national catastrophe. And in the wreckage, Prussian intellectuals asked a question: how do you rebuild a nation that just got crushed? And their answer was the classroom. The philosopher who laid out the blueprint was Johann Gottlieb Fichte, in a series of lectures called Addresses to the German Nation, delivered in occupied Berlin in 1808. Fichte argued for a total system of national education, one designed, in his own words, to mold a person so completely that, quote, he simply cannot will otherwise than what you wish him to will. Let's state that again. The goal wasn't to make workers. The goal was to make people who could not imagine disobeying. Loyalty to the state, punctuality, respect for hierarchy. A population that would willingly sacrifice for the nation. That is the real Prussian project, and it is thoroughly academically documented. Now here's where Horace Mann comes in. Mann did go to Europe in 1843. He did come home praising Prussian schools. But go read what he actually wrote. He praised their trained teachers, their public funding, their organization, the near total absence of beatings in the classroom. And when critics warned him that Prussian schooling was a tool of tyranny, Mann's answer was basically, then we'll use the same tools for freedom. His actual words: if Prussia can pervert education to support arbitrary power, then surely we can employ it to support republican institutions. He called the common school, quote, the great equalizer of the conditions of men, the balance wheel of the social machinery. That is not a man importing an obedience machine. That is a man who thought he could take the machine of the most controlled society in Europe and bolt it onto a democracy, and that nothing would go wrong. Whether he was right about that is basically the entire rest of this video. How we doing down there, Aeon? So the model crosses the Atlantic, and in America, something interesting happens. In 1892, a group called the Committee of 10, chaired by the president of Harvard, was assembled to standardize the American high school. And this is where the simple story starts to fall apart. The Committee of 10 did not recommend a dumbed-down worker track for the masses. The opposite, they recommended that every student get the same rigorous academic education: Latin, science, history, mathematics, real intellectual training for everyone. They were arguing against sorting poor kids into a lesser curriculum. So if you ever heard that the Committee of 10 designed school to make obedient workers, that's exactly backwards. Hold on to that, because it tells you the standardization story is messier than the villains in a room version. But messy is not the same as innocent, because at the same time, you get the philanthropists. In 1913, Frederick Gates, John D. Rockefeller's right-hand man, head of his General Education Board, published an essay called The County School of Tomorrow. And in it, he wrote this: "In our dream, we have limitless resources, and the people yield themselves with perfect docility to our molding hand. We shall not try to make these people or any of their children into philosophers or men of learning or of science." That quote is real, but Gates was writing specifically about rural schools in the poor post-Civil War South. It wasn't a signed master plan for the entire country. It wasn't a law. And yet, read his words again. The mindset is right there in print, published. The wealthiest men alive, dreaming out loud about molding other people's children into something deliberately less than thinkers. And that document shaped real schools across the South for decades. Now take Andrew Carnegie. His foundation in 1906 created something called the Carnegie Unit, the credit hour, the idea that learning is measured in standardized blocks of seat time the same way across every school. That single administrative decision became the skeleton of the entire American schedule, and it's still in your kid's school today. Carnegie wasn't trying to enslave anyone. He was trying to standardize and measure. But notice what gets built when the richest men in the country decide education should run like an efficient operation. You get a machine. And the cleanest, most disturbing proof of where that machine logic leads isn't a school at all. It's a car factory. In 1914, Henry Ford announced the $5 day, double the going wage. The press called it generosity. Here's the fine print they left out. The $5 day was a profit-sharing scheme. Your base wage was still $2.34. The extra $2.66, you only got that if you qualified. And to decide who qualified, Ford created something called the Sociological Department. This was a team of inspectors, 50 at first, 200 by the end of the year, who showed up at the workers' homes unannounced. They checked if your house was clean. They checked the state of your marriage. They checked whether you drank. If your wife worked outside the home, you could be disqualified. If you sent money to family back in an old country, you were suspect. Pass the inspection, you got the money. Fail it, you didn't. And if you were an immigrant, you were required to attend the Ford English School after your shift on your own time to learn standardized English and the habits of, their phrase, the Ford man. And the graduation ceremony from that school, this is documented by the Henry Ford Museum itself. The immigrant workers would dress in the traditional clothing of their home countries. They'd climb up and step into a giant prop, a literal cauldron painted with the words, "American melting pot." And seconds later, they'd emerge from the other side in identical American suits waving identical American flags. A factory that manufactured people. Same inputs, same outputs. The differences burned off like slag. That's not a metaphor I'm reaching for, that's a ceremony they actually staged. So here is the honest version of the factory school idea. Nobody designed Prussian schools for factories. But once America's industrialists got involved, the logic of the factory, standardize the inputs, measure everything, produce a uniform, predictable product, absolutely did seep into how we shape ordinary people. First, the testing, because this is the part of the machine you personally live inside. Mass standardized testing in America didn't start in a classroom. It started in the Army. 1917, a psychologist named Robert Yerkes convinced the military to let him test recruits at scale. His team built 2 tests, the Army Alpha for men who could read, Beta, all pictures and symbols for those who couldn't. They ran roughly 1.75 million men through it, the first mass intelligence testing in human history. And the men who built it, many of them were committed eugenicists. They used the results to argue that certain races and certain immigrants were biologically inferior and that science fed directly into the immigration restrictions of the 1920s. Then in the 1920s, those same psychometricians took that machinery and pointed it at children. The SAT is a direct descendant of an Army intelligence test. Now, what does a standardized, high-stakes test actually do to a classroom? Standardized testing does not automatically destroy thinking, but high-stakes testing, where a school's funding, a teacher's job, a student's future ride on the scores, reliably does something specific. It trains everyone to optimize for what can be measured. Teachers teach to the test. Studies out of Chicago and Texas found the same pattern. More testing pressure, more drilling, more memorization. Less writing, less problem solving, less of the messy, open-ended thinking that doesn't fit in a bubble. The system gets very, very good at producing recall. It is not built to produce people who question it. So that's the machine: bells, grades, credit hours, standardized tests with eugenic roots, a structure optimized to sort, measure, and manage millions of kids at once. Now let's talk about what the people who built this world choose for their own children. Let's start with Elon Musk. He pulled his kids out of the most expensive private schools in Los Angeles. His reason? They weren't doing the things I thought should be done. So in 2014, he built his own school inside the SpaceX factory, Ad Astra. In Latin, that means to the stars. No grades, no standardized tests, no sorting kids by age, just problems, ethics, and projects. He's since put $100 million into a new version of it in Texas. Then there's Silicon Valley. 2011, the New York Times reported on a school in the heart of tech country where executives from Google, Apple, Yahoo, and eBay send their kids. Roughly 3/4 of the students had a parent at big tech. And the school had no computers, no screens at all. Pens, paper, knitting needles, and conversation. Now I'm going to be honest here too, because some people oversell this one. The claim that all tech elites ban screens for their kids is not true. Wealthy parents actually give their kids plenty of tech. The real difference isn't abstinence, it's control. Rich families have the time and money to curate exactly how and when their kids touch a screen. Everyone else gets handed the default, and the default is engineered to be addictive. The people building the attention economy made very deliberate, very different choices for their own children. And the founders themselves, Larry Page and Sergey Brin, who built Google, Jeff Bezos, who built Amazon, the man who built Wikipedia, they all went to Montessori schools. No grades, no fixed schedule, self-directed learning. Page said it flat out. Montessori taught him not following rules and orders and being self-motivated, questioning what's going on in the world. He credits questioning authority for his $100 billion company. Your kids get detention for the same thing. And it's not just the tech crowd. The oldest elite schools in the country have run this way for a century. Phillips Exeter teaches with the Harkness method. 12 students and a teacher around an oval table. No lectures, just discussion. The Dalton School in New York has run on individualized learning contracts since 1919. Small classes, real debate, projects. Almost no standardized testing inside the building. This is the structural difference. Public schools are inside the state testing system. They are required to give those exams. Most private schools are outside of it. So while public schools get measured, ranked, punished, and reshaped around those scores, elite schools don't have to play that game. They didn't beat the system. They were never trapped in it. The numbers are stark. Public schools run around 15 students per teacher, over 20 in some states. Elite independent schools run as low as 6 to 8. These same elite schools that refuse to standardize their own classrooms, they still demand a standardized test to get in. And in 2025, Phillips Andover, one of the most prestigious schools in America, brought back its standardized testing requirements for admissions. Their reason? Objectivity, comparability. With grade inflation everywhere, they said a standardized score is the only way to hold every applicant to the same standard. Unfortunately, the wealthy elite have options you don't have. When a billionaire doesn't like the standardized test-driven system, he doesn't fix it, he exits it. He builds his own school or pays $40,000 a year for one that already exists. And the system he escaped stays exactly the way it is, because the only people with the power and money to change it have already bought their way out. And to be fair, there's a real case for the test. And it doesn't come from the elite, it comes from civil rights groups. The NAACP has fought to keep standardized testing for one blunt reason. Before it exited, schools could fail poor and minority kids and hide it. No data, no gap, no obligation to fix anything. The test makes the failure impossible to bury. You can't fix what you won't measure. But notice what it quietly admits. The test exists to measure how the bottom is doing. Nobody is giving the test to find out whether the kids at the top are being failed, because the kids at the top aren't taking it. So let me give it to you straight. The school they built for you isn't broken. It is doing exactly what a century of state builders, industrialists, and efficiency experts designed it to do. Produce people who are literate enough to work, orderly enough to manage, and measured enough to sort. The school they built for their own children is doing something completely different. It's producing the people who will own the companies, write the rules, and sit on the other side of the table from yours. They are not lying to you about education. They are showing you, with their own kids, with their own money, in plain sight, exactly what they believe a real education looks like. And it looks nothing like what they require of you. Here's the good news, and it's the whole reason this channel exists. You are not actually trapped in the first system. The exit isn't a $100 million school. The exit is understanding how the machine works and then refusing to let it raise your kids or finish raising you on autopilot. The questioning, the projects, the self-direction, the real conversations, none of that is patented. None of it requires a Junker estate or a SpaceX campus. It just requires knowing the game is rigged and choosing to play a different one. The people at the top opted out a long time ago. The only question left is when you do. Remember, the system wasn't built for you, so I say build your own.